Good morning to you on this Friday morning, and welcome, a very warm welcome to you to Penn Vicarage today, as I say, on this Friday. Hope you are happy, I hope you are well and keeping well and looking forward to a good day and good weekend with God. May I just remind you that we can't meet together for public worship this weekend, but we are putting some services online for you. 5:30 tomorrow on Saturday, there's a meditation. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, we're live streaming from the church, from St Bart's. 11:45 from St Anne's as a service, and there's an online evensong from St Bart's at 5:30 on Sunday evening. Lots of services for you to enjoy, so do please join us. We can't meet physically, but we can meet together online, and please do come along and do enjoy the services, and do please share them with your friends. Now, this morning's we're working our way, as you know, through 1 Corinthians, and we're in at chapter 9 this morning, and it's often called the rights of the apostle. What are people who work for God entitled to? Well, I often say that working for God, it's the pay's not good, but the benefits are out of this world. Anyway, no more of this triviality. Here goes 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and I'm reading to you verses 1 to 18. Paul writes, "Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I am not an apostle to others, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. This is my defence to those who examine me. Do we not have the right to our food and drink? Do we not have the right to be accompanied by a believing wife, as do the other apostles or the brothers of the Lord and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I, who have no right to refrain from working for a living? Who at any time pays the expenses for doing military service? Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of any of the fruit? Or who tends the flock and does not get any of its milk? Do I say this on human authority? Does not the law say the same? For it's written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it's threshing the grain. Is it for oxen that God is concerned, or does he speak entirely for our sake? It was indeed written for our sake, for whoever ploughs should plough in hope, and whoever threshes should thresh in hope of a share in the crop. If we have sown spiritual good among you, is it too much if we reap your material benefits? If others share this rightful claim on you, do we not still more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in what's sacrificed on the altar? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. But I have made no use of any of these rights, nor am I writing these so that it may be applied in my case. Indeed, I'd rather die than that. No one will deprive me of my ground for boasting. If I proclaim the gospel, this gives me no ground for boasting, for an obligation is laid on me, and woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am entrusted with a commission. What then is my reward? Just this, that in my proclamation I may make the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my rights in the gospel. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, this is a complicated passage actually, but I think it goes like this. I think what comes through all this passage is that Paul is on fire for the gospel of Jesus Christ. I think that's what it's about. Paul is absolutely on fire for gospel. He says he feels compelled to preach the gospel. He even goes so far as to say, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. So you can see the absolute coming through loud and clear is that Paul is on fire for the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the first thing to get. And I guess we can learn from this. I think we need to be actually more on fire for gospel. If we could get some more of that gospel zeal, I think it's something we can pray for. We should have that. Secondly, Paul tells us why he's on fire for the gospel. And at the beginning, he gives a whole series of reasons. And he's free, okay? He's been set free. The gospel has set him free in his life. That's reason number one. Reason number two, he's actually met Jesus Christ. That's compelling in itself. That changed his life. He's an apostle. He's a sent person. Okay, that's number three. Fourthly, he's been sent to them. He's got particular emphasis in preaching to them because he was particularly sent to them, that he's been sent to the Corinthians. And finally, of course, because these Corinthians have become Christians, they are the seal, they're the mark, they're the proof, if you like, that he is the real deal. So for all sorts of reasons, Paul feels on fire for the gospel. So far we've got Paul's, as I say, absolutely on fire for the gospel of Jesus Christ. Secondly, we've got the reasons why, because he met Jesus and so on. But the third thing that comes through is that Paul is absolutely clear to make sure that nothing stands in the way of the gospel, that nothing should stand in the way of the message. And this is what this business about payment is all about. What he's saying is, for all sorts of reasons, people who proclaim the gospel are allowed to earn their money, earn their pay from the gospel. And speaking personally, I'm quite pleased about that, really, for all sorts of reasons. The Lord's commanded it, people in the temple did, people in other walks of life, people working agriculture, people that are raising lambs, and all sorts of things. They all get their money from what they do. And what Paul is saying is absolutely clear. People who work for the gospel are allowed to gain their money, get their pay from the gospel. But what Paul is saying here is, even though I'm allowed to do this, I'm not going to, because I don't want anything to stand in the way of the gospel. I'm going to keep my tent making, because that's what he did. I'm going to keep my tent making because I don't want anything to stand in the way of the gospel. I'm quite entitled to get my money from the gospel, but I'm not going to because I don't want anything to stand in the way. Now, there's speculations as to why that might have been. Maybe because he didn't want to get involved in fundraising, so that could have deflected the gospel. It could be because he thought if he was being paid by Corinthians, then maybe he could find himself beholden to the whims and wherefores and particular needs of the particularly rich Corinthians. It could have been that. All sorts of reasons it could have been. We don't actually know. But we do know that Paul was so on fire for the gospel, he was so keen that nothing stood in the way of the gospel, that even though he was allowed to earn his money from the gospel, he optionally chose not to because he doesn't want anything to stand in the way of the gospel. So it's a complicated passage this morning, but I think it means just get the message that Paul is on fire for Jesus Christ. That's number one. He tells us why he's on fire for the gospel, because he's a sent man, he's met Jesus and so on. And thirdly, he's so keen to get the message across. He's so keen that nothing stands in the way of the gospel that he foregoes his right to be paid for the work he does because he doesn't want anything to stand in the way. And I suppose, my friends, as I said earlier, I think we can learn from this. I think if we could pray to God that God would set us on fire with the gospel, if only we had more of that missionary zeal, that desire to tell more people about Jesus. If we were aware of what's firing us up, knowing Jesus and meeting Jesus and feeling sent and feeling missionary. And thirdly, to say, let's make sure that as a church and as people, we do everything we can to make sure nothing stands in the way of the message. Paul said, I'm compelled to preach the gospel. He says, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Oh, that God would put that gospel zeal into our hearts so that we were as on fire as he was in those days, that we might spread the word today.